In the secluded village of Holloway, nestled deep within the ancient hollow forest, the nights were feared, and the shadows were alive with whispers. For centuries, the villagers lived in the eerie peace of knowing that the darkness held secrets best left undiscovered. But one autumn night, the veil between the known and the unknown was torn, unleashing a terror that had long slumbered in the heart of the forest. It began with the disappearance of young Emily Ward. Only 16, Emily was the daughter of the village blacksmith. She was last seen walking home from the weekly market, her path lit by the silvery glow of the full moon. When she didn't return by dawn, her parents raised the alarm. The village formed a search party, scouring the forest and the surrounding countryside, but there was no trace of her. It was as if the forest had swallowed her whole. Whispers filled the village. Stories of ancient curses and restless spirits began to surface. The elders, with their furrowed brows and trembling hands, spoke of a time when the forest demanded a sacrifice to keep the darkness at bay. The younger generation dismissed these tales as superstition, but the seed of fear had been planted. Weeks passed, and Holloway settled into an uneasy quiet. Then, the shadows began to move. It started subtly, with fleeting glimpses at the edge of vision, shapes that vanished when one turned to look. But soon, the whispers began. Soft, sibilant voices that seemed to come from the darkest corners of every room, every alley, every copse of trees. Margaret, the town healer, was the first to hear them clearly. As she tended to her herb garden one evening, the shadows seemed to gather around her. She heard her name, whispered by a voice that was not human, and felt a chill that cut to her very soul. She told no one, fearing they would think her mad, but the whispers grew more insistent, more coherent. They spoke of ancient rituals, of blood and sacrifice, and of a hunger that had been awoken. John Talbot, a scholar from the nearby city, arrived in Holloway. He had heard rumors of the strange happenings and was drawn by a mixture of curiosity and professional interest. Talbot was well-versed in folklore and the occult, and the stories from Holloway intrigued him. He began to investigate, speaking to the villagers and poring over the ancient texts in the village's tiny, dust-filled library. He found references to a forgotten deity, an entity known only as the Whisperer, said to inhabit the shadows of Hollow Forest. According to the old legends, the Whisperer demanded a human sacrifice every 100 years. In return, it granted the village protection from the darker forces that roamed the earth. Talbot was skeptical but couldn't ignore the pattern that began to emerge from his research. Every century, around the same time, there were accounts of disappearances and strange occurrences, always followed by a period of eerie calm. As Talbot delved deeper, the whispers found him too. At first, he brushed them off as the product of an overactive imagination, but they grew louder and more persistent. One night, as he pored over an ancient manuscript by candlelight, the shadows in his room seemed to come alive. The candle flickered, casting dancing shapes on the walls, and he heard his name called in a rasping, ethereal voice. John Talbot. The voice was cold and commanding, sending a shiver down his spine. Talbot stood, the manuscript slipping from his trembling fingers. The shadows coalesced into a vaguely humanoid form, its eyes gleaming with a malevolent light. "Release me," it whispered, its voice a sinister caress. "Bring me what I seek, and I will spare you." Talbot staggered back, his mind racing. The Whisperer was real, and it was growing impatient. He knew then that the fate of Holloway depended on his next move. Talbot decided to confide in Margaret, the healer, who had also been plagued by the whispers. Together, they sought out the village elders. Their initial reaction was one of disbelief, but the mounting evidence in their own encounters with the supernatural convinced them. They needed to act before more lives were lost. The ancient manuscript hinted at a ritual that could either banish the Whisperer or bind it more tightly to the mortal realm. To perform the ritual, they required the blood of the one who had awakened the Whisperer, the Keeper of Shadows. According to legend, the Keeper was always one of the village's own, marked at birth by a sign only the Whisperer could see. A tense search ensued. The villagers scrutinized each other, seeking the hidden mark. Fear and paranoia spread like wildfire. Then, a breakthrough. An old midwife, Sarah remembered a birth years ago where the infant bore a strange, shadowy birthmark. The child was Emily Ward. Emily had disappeared, but the Whisperer's presence meant she was still alive, trapped somewhere in the forest. Talbot and a group of brave villagers ventured into the heart of Hollow Forest, armed with torches, holy relics, and the resolve to end the nightmare. The forest was a labyrinth of twisted trees and creeping vines, shrouded in an unnatural darkness. The Whispers guided them, leading them deeper into the woods. They finally arrived at a clearing where an ancient stone altar stood, covered in strange, pulsating symbols. Emily was there, unconscious but unharmed, lying atop the altar. The shadows around her writhed and twisted, forming the spectral figure of the Whisperer. It watched them with gleaming eyes, a dark smile playing on its lips. "You have come," it hissed. "Do you bring my sacrifice?" Talbot stepped forward, holding the ancient manuscript. "We will not offer her to you," he declared. "We are here to end this." The Whisperer laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the forest. "You cannot end what has always been. The cycle must continue." Margaret and the elders began to chant the ritual's incantation. The air grew cold, and the shadows lashed out, but the villagers held firm. The symbols on the altar glowed with a fierce light, and the Whisperer's form began to waver. The ritual required a willing sacrifice, but not of blood. It needed the essence of the Keeper, freely given. Emily, waking from her stupor, understood what was needed. With tears in her eyes, she whispered, "I am ready." The light from the symbols enveloped her, and she began to fade, her essence merging with the magic. The Whisperer screamed in rage and pain, its form disintegrating into wisps of smoke. The shadows receded, and the forest was filled with a brilliant, purifying light. When the light faded, Emily was gone, but the Whisperer was banished. Holloway was free, but at a great cost. The villagers returned home, their hearts heavy yet hopeful. The forest was no longer a place of dread, but a sacred ground, a testament to Emily's sacrifice. Years passed, and the story of Emily's bravery became legend. Talbot documented the events, ensuring that future generations would remember the price of peace. Margaret continued her work as a healer, her wisdom deepened by the trials she had faced. Holloway thrived, no longer haunted by the shadows. But on certain nights, when the moon was full and the wind whispered through the trees, some claimed to hear a soft, gentle voice. Emily, watching over them, a guardian spirit of the forest she had saved.